this session, we want to move ahead and we want to talk about more the art of witnessing, or at least some preliminary things that we have to deal with. First of all, it's important for us to know that Jesus makes a few statements that we really need to understand. He wants us to understand that if we're going to represent him, he will represent us. If we don't want to represent him, then maybe there isn't any representation for us. Let's look at a couple of references here. Matthew 10, verse 32. Whosoever therefore shall confess me before men. Okay, we know that if we're witnesses to Jesus, and that's what part of our commission is. Then it says, whosoever therefore shall confess me before men, him will I confess also before my Father which is in heaven. Who wouldn't want Jesus to be confessing you or be representing you before his Father? Well, one of the ways to do that is to confess him first. Then it says he will confess you before his Father. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven. Now this sounds a bit harsh for the way Jesus would operate, and yet he's saying that if you are ashamed of me, because it says in Luke 9:26, is if you're ashamed of me, then I'll be ashamed of you. If you don't want to represent me, then I probably won't be representing you before the Father. And yet he says, if you do represent me, if you witness before me, I will represent you before the Father. So there's a whole lot involved here in terms of this whole idea that we are agents for Jesus and that we are witnesses and that we need to get out there and share about Jesus. It's not just something that some people get called to do it, others don't. No, we're all called to do that. Mind you, there's different ways that we can do that we'll get into. But before we get into that, we need to lay a bit of groundwork here. First of all, most Christians have the misconception that ministry happens in and around churches. That is not the case. Jesus' life proved that abundantly, because Jesus, most of his ministry, most of the documented ministry that we have is not in the synagogue, it is out there in the world. Jesus would go out there and associate with those people that were in need of him most. In fact, he gives us a commission. He says this in Matthew 28:19, he says, "Go ye therefore into all the world." That word "go" means that we're not to hang around amongst ourselves and expect ministry to happen there within the church. The commission is to go, to leave, to get outside the walls of the church itself. And Jesus gave this parable about 100 sheep, 90 and 9, and then one. And we can read about that Luke 15, 4-7, and a couple other Gospels cover it as well. But he talks about this parable. He talks about this master has 100 sheep, and one of them gets lost. So the 99, they're all together. They're in the paddock. They're safely there. What does the master do? The master leaves the 99 there and goes out into the dangerous wilderness and hunts down that single lost sheep. Most of us would say, well, 1 out of 100, if we're going to lose, one sheep out of 100, probably not the worst thing in the world. Probably an errant sheep anywhere. Probably wasn't a real follower anyway, so just let it go, see what happens. If it finds its way back, good. If not, leave it. No, in this parable, Jesus says, which represents him, I'm going to be out in the wilderness looking after that one. Now, sometimes we look at this and we say, it's all about that lost sheep out there, and it's all about the master hunting the lost sheep down. Well, there's another way to look at this. If Jesus had it exactly the way he wanted, if the parable would go exactly the way that he would want it rather than the way it is, there would be nobody in the paddock. The 99 sheep would be out there with the master trying to hunt down the lost one. That is what Jesus really wants. He doesn't want 99 bleeding sheep in the paddock, in the church, waiting around while one person is out there, whether you think it's the pastor or whether you think it's God or Jesus, whatever, out there doing the work. That isn't the way it works. That's the way we sometimes do it. We say we hire a pastor, and what do we make out of our pastors? We make them babysitters of Laodicean brats. And we want them to be here to serve us. We want them to feed us pablum. They're all for us, not for those people out there. If the parable really worked, the churches would be empty, and the Christians would be out there in the world saving and seeking to save that which is lost, because that's what Jesus came here to do. Now Jesus said in another place in Matthew 10, verse 16 and 17, since we're already in Matthew 10 a bit ago here, it says, Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Okay, so we just got the commission. Go ye therefore, get out into the world. Now Jesus is saying, Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Well, I can tell you one thing. Sheep do not belong in the midst of wolves. You put a sheep even around one wolf, it's done. You put a sheep around a whole pack of wolves, it's nothing but fragments in a few seconds. But Jesus says, behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves. Be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. So he's trying to get this across to us, that what I want in terms of ministry for you is not what takes place in church, it is what takes place out there. I will be sending you as sheep out amongst wolves, but don't think he's not going to protect you while you're out there. And of course, we have another one in Matthew 7:15 that kind of goes the other way. Of course, we know that Satan is going to try to emulate or counterfeit or work the opposite of God. So here in Matthew 7 verse 15, it says this, beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. It says, come to you. So in other words, God says, I will send you as sheep out amongst the wolves, meaning amongst those lost people. What is Satan going to do? He's going to take wolves and put them in sheep clothes and put them in churches. So the problem is this. If you want to spend all your time in the churches, you could be deceived simply because there's going to be wolves amongst you that look like sheep. Could be a pastor, could be anybody. That's the way Satan works. So the bottom line is this. Jesus is the greatest example for us to emulate in terms that he, like I just got through saying a minute ago, he didn't spend that much time of his ministry in the church. It was out there in the world to the level of, Matthew 11:19 says that Jesus was accused of being a gluttonous winebibber. Friends of publicans, friends of sinners. Jesus hung around with the least in society. He hung around with those people that nobody else would want to hang around with. He wasn't in the synagogue. He was out there. And I do a lot of pastoral retreats, and I brought this up several times. If you haven't been to pastors, if you haven't been accused of being a gluttonous winebibber lately, then maybe there's a problem with your ministry. Because if you're following Jesus' prescribed means, you would be out there associating so closely with the lost that you would more than likely be accused of being one of them, even though your motives through the Holy Spirit through you would be to seek and to save that which is lost. Because see, Jesus was friends with prostitutes. He was friends with the wealthy. He was friends with children. He was friends with rich. He was friends with poor. Jesus could relate to anybody. And where would Jesus be today, given the history of what he did back then? Where would he be today if he were to walk the earth today? I can tell you where he'd be. He'd be in the bars and the taverns in your neighborhood, because that's where the lost are, and that's where he'd more than likely be accused of being a gluttonous winebibber. Would be in there drinking and partying? No, he wouldn't be. He'd be there to seek and to save that which is lost. Why? Because that's where the lost is. And that's what Jesus' commission is for us. Go where the lost is, not where the lost isn't. And, unfortunately, here's what we do sometimes. We want to bring the lost into our environment rather than us going into their environment. We come up with all these little tantalizing things to get people to maybe come into our building. We do health seminars and we do prophecy seminars. Not that anything wrong with those things, but the whole idea is get them in there with us. We're expecting them to go out of their comfort zone to come into us. And that is not the way God wants it. God wants it the other way around. And I've shared this a number of times, and some people don't like the way I say this, but I mean, it's the absolute reality of it. In fact, one time I was doing an interview on a television program, and they said, oh, we don't like this. Cut. Producer comes out, says, we're not going to do this. But here's the way it works. I want you each here to imagine that you're the most conservative Christian you know, and if you already are, good. If you have to imagine that, whatever. So the point is conservative Christian. Or if you can't do that, imagine your pastor or anybody else that you may think is conservative. But the bottom line is this. Imagine the most conservative Christian you know, and you have that person walk into a topless nightclub. Well, if that conservative person walks into a topless nightclub, I can tell you what, there'll be a huge amount of trepidation happening when they walk into that place. They're going to go, oh no, what am I doing here? This is so foreign to me that it just absolutely freaks me out. Well, that same feeling that the ultra-conservative Christian would have walking into a topless nightclub is the same feeling that a lost person, a postmodern secular postmodern, walking into the church, that's the same kind of trepidation they have coming into our environment. And yet we say, you come into here or forget it. That is not the way it works. The commission is to go, get out of the churches, get out there where they are, meet them at their level. Paul said this in 1 Corinthians 9:19-22. He says, I became as those who are without the law. I became as those who live under the law. I became as a Jew. I became as blah, blah, blah. What Paul was saying is I went into their world. I merged with their lives so that they're in their comfort zone. And I did that for one reason, and that is so I can win more people to Jesus. The bottom line is we are to be in the world, not of the world. That means we have to be out there associating just like Jesus did, just like Paul did, just like the disciples did. They were out on the street ministering there, and they were being accused by who was their biggest detractors? Was it the lost people out there in the world? No, it wasn't. When I say lost, I'm talking about the biblical term, lost, those who just don't have nothing to do with God. No, the biggest thing was they were being accused, they were being derailed by church leaders because the church leaders couldn't understand. What are you doing out there hanging out with all those wicked people? Now here's the deal. It's all about friendships. It's all about your ability to integrate with other people, not them integrating with you. And I want to tell you something. We as Christians, and I don't care what denomination, because I've preached in all different denominations, but we as Christians are the weakest in terms of ability to make friends. We are the weakest of any group of people in society. Now, just so I don't pick totally on Christians, this can happen also in the world. You get people who hang, like from Boeing or Microsoft or General Electric or whoever, if all you ever do is hang out with your own, you're going to become weak at making friendships with people as well. Now here, let me explain what I mean by that. Why are we so weak at friendship making? Because here's the way it works in making friends. If you want to make a friend with somebody, you have to find a common denominator. You have to find something that you both share in common. That's where you begin friendships. And when you find that commonality, you begin to build off that. And of course, we know, psychologists tell us this, but it's logical anyways. We know that all relationships are built on and based on something called trust. Trust between human, animal, human, whatever. All relationships. I mean, if every time your dog comes into the house, you kick the dog, it will no longer trust you. There will be no relationship. If you step on someone else's space or you're not friendly to somebody, you will betray that trust. And here's the way trust works. You find a common ground that you both share, and then you begin to expose a little bit of yourself, and they can either tromp on what you just shared about yourself, or they can coddle it and say, wonderful, now I'm going to share a little bit about myself. And you go back and forth, and pretty soon you can be more and more open about your inner self. And if the other person doesn't step on that, you begin to build this trust relationship, and that's what builds a solid foundation in friendship. But it all starts with finding common ground. Now, why would I say Christians are weak at this? Because here's the way it works. If I travel somewhere in the world, which I do, across the world, the other side of the world, and I land and somebody picks me up who's of the same denomination affiliation as I am, I have so many things in common with that person that I have to do absolutely nothing to find common ground and to build a relationship. I don't have to go out of my comfort zone one bit. I'm not at all nervous about it or anything else because I have this built-in common ground. And if I go to travel somewhere else in the world, to another denomination from what I am, and I have to go speak to them, I have a new common ground with those people, a different one, I shouldn't say a new one, but a different one than I probably do with my own denomination, and that is Jesus. We both share that common denominator of Jesus. So again, I'm comfortable. I don't have to work hard. You're a Christian of another denomination, sure, but guess what? We both serve Jesus. We have that common denominator. But here's the problem. If you hang around with only those people that you have common denominators with, you don't have to work at making friends. They just automatically happen. And like I said, it happens in the world. If somebody from Microsoft travels from Redmond, Washington, or Seattle, Washington, and they go to Sydney, Australia, and they go to the headquarters there, and somebody from Microsoft picks them up, and then you drive them to Microsoft's office, and you have meetings with Microsoft people. They don't have to work either to make friends. Why? Because you got this common denominator. If they hang around only Microsoft people, they're going to be weak at making friendships. And their salespeople, if that's all they ever do, they're going to have a tough time integrating with people out in the world. And so because we're that way, We become weak at making friendships because we don't have to exercise that. Now, on the other hand, the people out in the world, those who don't have built-in common denominators like we do, whether it's business or whether it's religion, those people go out in the world and they have to find common denominators every day of the week that they're of people, new people they're associated with. They have to come up with something new and creative. What do we have in common? That's why people say, let's go have a beer. It's not because they want to go get drunk. They say, let's go have a beer because that beer becomes a common denominator. Or let's go have a coffee. That becomes a common denominator. That's something they can both share. And while they're there, they can be talking and they can be laying a little bit of themselves out to the other person. That lays a little bit of self out to themselves. So the bottom line is they have to come up with different creative ways. It may be the weather. It may be the fact that you're both unemployed, or it may be the fact that you both have kids at the same school, whatever. You have to find a new creative common denominator. But the problem is this. If we're to be out there integrating with them, and they're way more sophisticated at making friendships than we are, we got a problem. So it means that we have to begin to try to learn to make friends with other people and understand the whole concept of friendship making. Here's what I find interesting. Some of the major business schools in the world, including Harvard, don't offer courses on how to make friendships. It is the single most valuable attribute I have in my business, is the ability to make friends with people, because when I make friends, I'm no longer competing on the same level as anybody else. It's no longer product for product. It is now my friendship versus their product in most cases. When I walk into an office of a CEO, have ever met them before, or a boardroom of board of directors, Here's the situation. I walk in there, I've got 2 to 4 minutes to bond with those people and begin a friendship, whether it's the CEO or whoever it is. So what do? I don't plan this anymore because it's just natural. But I walk in an office and I scan the office. If I see a baseball glove there, what am I going to talk about? Knitting? Of course not. I'm going to be talking about baseball. If I see a picture of a sailboat on the wall, I'm going to talk about sailing. If I see pictures of kids and family, I'm going to talk about kids and family. Because then I'm immediately on common ground with them. I have identified a common denominator with those people, and now I can begin to build a relationship with them. So when a competitor comes along and says, okay, you make widgets and I make widgets. Well, now the CEO is going to have to say, well, who's got the prettier widget if they're both capable of doing the same thing? But if I was able to go in there and build an instant relationship with that person, now all of a sudden I have a big competitive advantage. It's no longer apples for apples and oranges for oranges. I'm building off of a relationship. And so to understand how friendship making works and to be able to exercise that will not only benefit you in your worldly pursuits, but it is mandatory if you're going to carry out the gospel commission of going out into the world and meeting the lost where they are and making friends with them and leading them to Jesus. Because the bottom line is, if you don't have friendships with people, they will not trust you. Remember, all relationships are building on trust. Well, trust comes by way of friendships, sharing a little more of each other till you build this trust. People will not listen to you. People will not give you the time of day if they don't have any trust in you, and if they don't have any respect for you. That's number one. Number two is people, if they don't hang around you, how will they ever have an opportunity to see why your life may be any better than theirs? Yes, they're going to have a void. They're going to be empty. They're going to be pursuing just like most people do in society. But if they can't see your peace of mind, if they can't hang around you to see the way you operate, your ethics, whatever else it is, they will never be able to observe what a Christian life is like, not only just what it may look like, but what it gives you, because if you're living the true Christian life, you're going to have contentment, even when you're being kicked in the face. Because you understand that you're part of a much greater plan. You believe there's a God and creator of the universe. When you come home at the end of the day, you can unload on somebody bigger than yourself. So friendship making is absolutely critical. So now, okay, let's have a little lesson here in how do you make friends, because I've shared this with secular universities on how to make friends, because it's absolutely critical in sales or anything else. Bottom line is this, like I said, you find something you both share in common. Now, if you're both in a bank lineup, long lineup in a bank, waiting for a teller, what do you think you would bring up in order to initiate a friendship with somebody else in the line? Of course, it'd be the long bank lineups. You'd say, oh man, these long lineups. And of course, they're experiencing the same thing. So there you have something in common, and immediately you have a starting point to build a mini relationship, because mini might happen right there. I mean, other things could be a simple one, but it works, is weather. Wasn't it a nice day today? It's just absolutely fantastic. I mean, the sun, blah, 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 whatever. Or it's so miserable today, I wish I would have dressed warmer, whatever. The other person's going to be in the same situation as you. You bring that up, that's where you start your relationship. But we as Christians, if we hang around with our own, which I'm sorry to say is the life of most Christians, we will become weaker and weaker and weaker at friendship making to the point where we'll be intimidated by going out there and meeting those in the world. Now, I think I mentioned it earlier in one of the seminars. I went to Christian schools from grade 1 through 16. Doesn't mean I repeated a bunch of classes or school years. I went through college and Christian education as well. When I came out after 16 years of Christian education, I was a complete separatist. Meaning I couldn't integrate with anybody else because I was so used to hanging around with my own that I had no friendship making skills to the world. I had no friendship making skills even with other people of other denominations. Because by that point, I wasn't even looking at Jesus as a common ground with those people. Since then, I've been thrust into, like I mentioned earlier, I learned to engrave guns. And one of the things that led to, ultimately, it's a long story, I don't have time, but I started accidentally at first engraving guns for the Hells Angels, members of the Hells Angel. Well, I want to tell you, when you hang out with some of those guys, it shocks a separatist Christian into just like almost oblivion, because their lifestyle is so different than mine. Their common ground of what I could find in common with them is so different. It became guns, but the bottom line is, it was such a stretch for me that God actually used that experience to wake me up and to erode my separatist attitude so that when I got to what quotes, the people that I have maybe could find easier common grounds with, it was a whole lot easier for me. The bottom line is, God needed to erode my separatist attitude. He needed to slowly get me to understand that if I'm going to integrate people in the world for His sake, I'm going to have to understand how friendships work. Now, the thing is this. Here's what we do a lot of times. I like to sport fish. Since I like to sport fish, I also have to apply fishing analogies when I'm preaching. Otherwise, people think I'm totally barbaric. And I know this sounds really haywire, but if I can bring up a few analogies to deal with fishing, well, it justifies the whole thing. And I know that's not the way it should be, but that's the way I'm going to do it today here. Anyways, here's what we do sometimes as churches. We're told we're fishers of men. Jesus told the disciples, I will make you fishers of men, because they were real fishermen. And so He says, I'll make you fishers of men. So we have to take that somewhat seriously. So when we fish for men, how do we typically do it? Well, a lot of churches, here's the way they do their what we call evangelistic outreach programs, how they reach the lost. They all get together, they plan, they scheme, they all decide they're going to go fishing. But here's typically the way it works when church people go fishing for people, not fish. They all come to their church, they plan this all out, they bring their fishing poles, they bring their tackle, and then they open the windows of the churches. Oh, you don't want to go outside. It could be stormy out there. You could fall in. You could drown, whatever else out there in the world, so we're going to fish. Now, I hope you understand this is tongue-in-cheek. You know what tongue-in-cheek means in Australia? They get it. They know what sarcastic humor is. I'm bringing this up tongue-in-cheek, meaning I don't mean exactly everything I'm saying, but you get the point. So here we are in churches. We all bring our tackle boxes. We bring our fishing poles. We open the windows. And we're not going to leave the church. We're going to try to fish from here. So we put on lures, diet, and we put on, different things like that. Behavioral things. These are literally the behavioral lures. These are the things we're going to get those lost people interested. Maybe we can land one. So we all start casting out the windows of our churches. And we cast until we start to develop tennis elbow and the carpal tunnel syndrome and in our wrists because we're doing so much reeling. And once in a while, somebody gets a bite. And they holler, oh, got a bite. Oh, man, everybody wants to hear about it. Oh, I didn't get him, but I got a bite. Oh, that's exciting. And so then we continue to cast. Once in a while, somebody will hook one. Somebody actually bites one of our tantalizing little things out there in the community. And so the person who doesn't really know how to fish well, they go out there, they get this bite, they hook them, and they just reel like crazy, just as fast as they can reel them. And of course, we know that when you're really doing fishing, you got to play the fish a little bit. You just don't reel them straight in. And of course, they jump off just before they get to the boat. Meanwhile, the whole church is crooked because everybody went over to that side to watch to see if they're going to actually land them. But here's what's cool. Once in a while, we actually land a fish. Somebody hooks one. and the fish wants to run away for a bit. So you let him go. You just let it's a really cool sound when your reel goes zzz, as the line's running out there. You let him go, and then you slowly bring him back. And then they want to go for another run. Okay, you let them go, and then you bring them back slowly, and you might have to do this 2-3 times, depending on how much fight there. But finally, you play them out, you get them right up to the boat, and everybody's standing there watching. You get out the fishing net down into the water, and you swoop them in the boat. Now, here's the problem. The new fish, the new person that just came is flopping, and the slime going all over, and they're just disrupting everything. So we take clubs and we beat them over the head. We got to beat them into submission right away because they're disrupting the way we do things. Now, please, that's tongue in cheek, but is it too far off of what we really do? We try to fish from inside the church and get people to come in. We want them to go out of their comfort zone. I want to tell you what it takes for a lost person to come to a religious meeting. They have to, first of all, undergo the trepidation of this strange place that I'm going to be going. They're going to have to overcome the sense of feeling that my friends will think I'm nuts because I'm going to go to a religious meeting. That's tough. They have to overcome peer pressure issues. They also will have to forego maybe their evening of watching television or their family time around the table, whatever it is. Then they're going to have to think, what am I going to wear? We really don't know what those people do. Sometimes we see them dressed up. And what happens if they sing? We don't know their songs. We'll look like idiots if we just sit there and not sing along with their songs. This is what the lost think about before they ever walk into a church. And yet we're saying, you come in here, take it or leave it. That is not the way it works. Jesus says, go ye therefore, I want you to be sheep amongst wolves out there doing the work, not in here. That is not God's commission to try to bring people in here. So we force people to go through this horrific experience of finally coming here, and then sometimes we think, we got to teach you everything we know as quick as we can do it. And we just wail on them all this information. They're just totally overwhelmed. They're completely blurred. They lose track to who this Jesus even was sometimes because we just have to tell them everything. And then we come to the end of it. Could be 21 days, could be a month, whatever else. We just say, okay, make a decision. Take it or leave it. And if they're not ready because they're just completely, their heads are swimming, they may say, well, I'm not ready. Okay, too bad. You had your chance. See you later. That is not the way Jesus works. That is not the way the gospel commission works. My friends, you and I need to go to our comfort zone. We have to get out there in the world, and we have to make friends with those people out in the world at their level, meeting them like Paul said, I became as. Doesn't mean you have to compromise your standards. When my wife and I are invited to cocktail parties, we go to the cocktail parties. Not because we want to go there and drink. We don't drink. But what we do, we go there because I know God needs an agent there. Where do I think Jesus would be? He would be at the cocktail parties because that's where he was. He was accused of being a gluttonous wine bibber because he was hanging out in those places. So when I'm invited, my wife and I are invited to those places, that's what we do. We go to those places. We hang out with those people because they are empty there. I have been to Hollywood celebrity parties. I've been to the wedding of Mark Hughes, $5 million spent on California's most flamboyant billionaire. My wife and I were invited to his wedding. We attended his wedding there. And here it's all these who's who in society, Hollywood celebrities and rich people from all over the world, 450 of us, and my wife and I were invited. Of course we're going to be there because people are empty there, especially more affluent in society, because the more you have, the emptier you get. Because there's fewer and fewer options to try to fill the void in your life. And Jesus says, I am the one who fills the void. If you lift me up, I will do the work. And we sometimes overlook that. But my friends, never underestimate the value of taking time to understand how friendships work. Never underestimate the value of making friends with lost people in society. I want to tell you something. It will be the spice of your life if you hang out with lost people. And we do not need to have the motive, I'm going to hang out with you so that I can win you back into this church. No, Jesus was out there with no other motive than to touch the hurting souls out in society, and that's what he wants from you, and that's what he wants from me, and that's what the Great Commission is all about. Go ye therefore into all the world. And my friends, when that happens, Jesus will become, because the last prophecy given to us deals with this gospel will be preached, not might be preached. This gospel will be preached, and then, and only then, will the end come. And my friend, it's all on your and my shoulders, because we are the hands, feet, and heart of Jesus.